could I possibly stay at your house today? My father, who was supposed to be living with my sister-in-law while my brother was on a business trip abroad, showed up at our house looking thin and ragged. Dad, what happened? I yelled in surprise when I saw him. We invited my father into the house and listened to his story, and my husband and I were seething with anger. After deciding to take my father in, my husband called my sister-in-law. We're not going to ask any more questions. We've decided to take my father-in-law in, my husband informed her. To this, my sister-in-law replied, "That's a lifesaver. I'm all for it, but no returns allowed." She seemed to be overjoyed. However, a few months later, she would beg us, "Give me my father-in-law back. My name is Iris, and I'm 29 years old. I live with my husband, John, and I also have a brother named Edward. Edward recently married a woman named Linda. After our mother passed away a few years ago, my father, Edward, and his wife had been living together. Many people say that living together can be challenging, but I had heard that Edward was managing things well in his case. Although my father was not the type to be overly domineering, he was a kind man from a generation that dedicated oneself to work. My father never did any housework until my mother passed away, which had been a concern for us, but hearing that things were going smoothly eased my worries. However, Edward had to go on a long-term business trip abroad. Edward tried to refuse the business trip using his living arrangement with my father as a reason, but it was an important project, so he had no choice but to go. I initially thought Edward and Linda would go together since it was a long-term assignment. So John and I started discussing whether we should live with my father. Thankfully, John and my father had a good relationship, and John agreed to the idea. But to our surprise, Linda decided to stay and continue living with my father. I'd never heard of a daughter-in-law and father-in-law living together alone. However, this was the result of a discussion between Edward and Linda. Edward is also a very kind person and would never force Linda if she were reluctant. Since they both agreed, we decided to respect their decision. I told Linda, "If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know." She replied, "It's okay. I'll take good care of your father. Don't worry." However, a few months later, my father suddenly visited our house. It was late, and both John and I were surprised. Furthermore, my father was terribly thin and his clothes were worn out. "Dad, what happened?" I asked. He responded, "Well, I know it's sudden, but could I stay at your house tonight?" Of course, we welcomed my father into our house. We prepared some simple food and warm drinks and started to hear his story. At first, my father was reluctant to talk, but since he had come to us, he began to tell us what happened in bits and pieces. Edward had initially said, "The company can arrange for you and Linda to live abroad with me. Although it's a long-term business trip, it's temporary, so we all can go abroad." However, Linda objected, saying, "I don't want to live in an unfamiliar country." Moreover, she was considerate towards my father, saying, "It would be hard on your dad to live abroad at his age, even if it's for a limited time." So they decided that my father and Linda would stay put, but it seems Linda just wanted to do as she pleased while Edward was away. My father had entrusted his pension to Edward and Linda, and they managed all his affairs. Edward even increased the amount of money he was giving for living expenses so that Linda could take care of my father. But as soon as Edward left, Linda stopped doing everything, cooking, cleaning, you name it. She would prepare meals, but every day it was just store-bought sandwiches or rotisserie chicken. Linda was hardly at home every day. But at my age, eating only convenience store food and instant meals took a toll on my health. I wish I could cook, but I never had to before, and it wasn't easy for me. I once asked Linda, "I'm not asking for 3 meals a day, but could you at least cook dinner properly? I'm okay with leftovers for breakfast, and I can figure something out for lunch." I tried requesting that once. My father said with a sad expression. When my father made such a request, Linda laughed it off, saying, "You just ate, didn't you? LOL, are you losing your memory or something? LOL. She didn't take him seriously. Of course, my father wasn't senile. As Linda neglected the house, it gradually became a mess. It's natural the house would become messy even if it's just a woman and an elderly man living there. My father was doing his best to clean up every day. However, even when I try to tidy up Linda's things, she complains, saying, "You'll lose track of where everything is." It seems that my father couldn't bear it anymore and protested, saying, "It's completely different from when Edward was here. And even the promises are different. I'm not asking for everything to be perfect, but this is ridiculous." In response, Linda became furious. And she said, "Well then, why don't you leave? I've been putting up with it since we started living together." It was because Edward wanted to live together that I reluctantly agreed. It's not like I enjoy living with an old man who's not even related by blood. "I'll tell Edward, you sexually harassed me, leave quickly." It seems she shouted at my father and chased him out. My father said, "It's not that I didn't want to be accused of sexual harassment. I think Edward would understand if I told him about it, but when I called Edward once for a different reason, he sounded really exhausted from being in an unfamiliar foreign country. At that time, Edward said, it might have been even worse if I had brought my parents here." Are you getting along well with Linda? I didn't want to add to Edward's worries in that situation. I thought we could talk about it when he came back, but when Linda told me to leave, I reached my limit and left. He also mentioned that it was more a feeling of resignation than reaching the limit of his patience. I can't forgive that. Besides, that place is your house, right? Dad, that's ridiculous. You should definitely tell Edward about this. I yelled in anger. Then my father tried to calm me down, saying, "Iris, calm down. I don't want to burden Edward with unnecessary worries. As I said earlier, I've been a man dedicated to my work. I don't want to interfere with Edward's work. Please leave me alone until his business trip is over." And he said to us, "I didn't have anywhere else to go today, so I came to your house. I'm sorry, but can you let me stay for a few days? Starting tomorrow, I'll start looking for an apartment where I can live alone." Then John proposed, No, live together with us. Originally, we were talking about living together with you if Edward and Linda were going abroad together. Besides, you're in the same line of work as me. I have various things I want to discuss about work. Of course, if you're okay with it, could you help us with the work? Help with the work. I was surprised to see my father's face light up when he heard John's words. I had thought that my father would live a leisurely life after retirement, but it turned out that he actually wanted to work. "Well then, if you don't mind, can I take you upon your offer?" My father agreed to live with us. And that's how we ended up living together with my father. However, it would be strange to start living with my father without telling Linda. John called Linda. "Linda, I won't ask for all the details anymore. We've decided to take in my father-in-law here," he told Linda. Then Linda exclaimed, "Thank goodness. I didn't like having an old man not blood-related in the house. I'm totally in favor of it. But there's no returning him, okay?" She was overjoyed. I couldn't contain my frustration hearing that from John. But John said to me, "I understand how you feel, but let's be patient and respect your father's wishes." 2 months later, I received a call from Linda. She seemed excited about something. When I asked her what was going on, she said, "Hey, I thought John's company was a small, insignificant company, but it's being featured in famous magazines and it's a hot topic on the internet. Isn't that crazy? And it says the company's performance is rapidly improving." She was extremely excited. I thought she was being rude as usual, considering that she just called my husband's company small and insignificant. The phone call was about work. I asked John to talk. Linda kept repeating the same story to John when he took over the call. Calmly, John replied, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm grateful for that, but almost all of this is thanks to my father-in-law." Linda asked in confusion, Thanks to your father-in-law? What does that mean?" John and I decided to explain it to Linda step by step. First of all, my father had retired, but at 65, he was still full of energy. His mind was sharp as well. And my father used to be a master carpenter. John is the president of a construction company, although it's on the smaller side. To boost my father's morale and incorporate his opinions, we decided to have him help with the work. As soon as my father started assisting with the work, he quickly regained his skills from his active days. He demonstrated delicate techniques that couldn't be expressed with machines, and customers who saw and heard about his finished products started placing orders one after another. As a result, it became a hot topic, and requests for interviews started pouring in from various media outlets. I was busy at the reception desk in John's company, so it was quite challenging to handle, but I was very happy considering that my father's achievements were the reason behind it. Now we have an overwhelming amount of work coming in. The company is moving quickly to expand its business. At first, my father was just helping out, but now he has an important position in the company. My father, who originally enjoyed working, became more and more lively. I was moved to see him shining again. As we were happily discussing it, Linda seemed to be getting more and more irritated on the other end of the phone. What is this? When he was at home, he was just a useless old man. I took care of your father until he started taking care of himself, right? So give me $1 million as compensation for that. Linda said. She was talking nonsense. What are you talking about? There's no way we can do that. John replied, and he hung up the phone. Linda contacted us multiple times afterwards, but we ignored all of them. I thought she might come to our house directly, but that didn't happen. It was because my brother returned home earlier than planned during that time. He learned about my father being kicked out and was furious with Linda. When my brother came home intending to surprise us, he was shocked to see the messy state of the house. Rather to his surprise, there were many signs that Linda had brought other men into the house. Linda also went pale when she saw my brother. As he listened to Linda's side of the story, she desperately tried to justify herself, and in the process, she asserted, "I was sexually harassed by your father." Half doubting the assertion, my brother came to our house. My father calmly played a recording for my brother, who was in an agitated state. It contained Linda's threats of when she said, "You sexually harassed me." When my father asked her to help with household chores, as well as her derogatory remarks about my father. We were also surprised because we didn't expect my father to have such a recording. I thought it might be necessary after Edward's return. It would be tough for Edward to be caught in the middle of conflicting stories between me and his wife. But I couldn't just admit to everything either. That's why I kept this recording as evidence, he explained calmly. I was deeply moved by my father, who always thinks of his children. With our testimonies added, Linda could no longer escape the truth. Afterwards, my brother investigated Linda and found out that she had used all the money he sent her and my father's money for her affairs. She confessed that she wanted to get rid of my father because she wanted to bring her lovers to the house. It goes without saying that my brother didn't forgive Linda, and they ended up getting divorced. After that, Linda's life took a downward spiral. She demanded my father's compensation, but there was no way we would accept it. Linda couldn't receive the compensation from my father, and she was divorced by my brother, who also demanded alimony. On top of that, some of her affairs turned out to involve married men, and their spouses also demanded compensation from her. She persistently contacted us and saying unbelievable things like, "Your father has talent for work, right? I'll start a company and hire your father, so return him to me." So I said, "Oh, Linda, didn't you say my father was non-refundable? So there's no way I'll return him. Goodbye," and hung up the phone. After that, Linda was kicked out of the house where my father had been living. The house has now been remodeled by my father and is being used as a combined residence and office. Linda was demanded a large amount of compensation, but since she had been playing around as a housewife all along, she couldn't find a daytime job anywhere. It seems that she is working 2 jobs, struggling and exhausted. I think I once saw her working at a supermarket cash register, but she looked so worn out that I'm not sure if it was Linda or not. But that doesn't really matter now. As for my brother, he's completely focused on work, saying that he's learned his lesson from this marriage.